If I could imagine him actually dying, I felt like that would have been easier. The death of a 17-year marriage was big. When you feel like your heart has been shattered and you're like, wow, this is one of the worst things that I could have imagined.
The word grief in many capacities, not always biological death. I think we grieve many different things.
The process of grief, it's like you can't eat, you can't sleep, you can't focus.
That idea of grieving something you have the ability to see is what kind of like twists the heart even differently. I don't even know. Thank you for tuning into Dead Talk. Is this when I say that? That's running right there. All right, Luci, I appreciate you for taking the time to talk to someone you don't know. Even though you've told me to ask, might even go there to start off, but thank you for being here. We're starting off with some laughs, so maybe we shouldn't talk about what we're about to talk about. But I want to thank you again for taking the time to talk to me, because you don't know who I am and you're willing to open up about a sensitive topic that I don't even know much about beyond what I've seen you kind of talk about on social media. And to me, it was just the passion. I feel like when you were talking about your grief, that just resonated. I'm sure I'm clearly not the only one that felt that. And so I was looking forward to talking to you. And how does grief, what is your grief story? How has it affected your life, and where does that begin?
I mean, I think that we all have experiences of grief from earlier on. There are maybe micro experiences of grief, like when we have to move away from our best friend, or we leave our childhood home, or our favorite stuffed animal, just things that seem really benign. But they're moments of like, oh, I lost something that's precious to me. I think my first experience of deeper grief was when I essentially lost my father. He's still alive, but mental health took him to another place. And I witnessed him attempt to kill himself and then be taken away to an institution. And I had not seen him in 25 years, or maybe more. So that was a big grieving period, but I didn't know how to be with my grief. So I wasn't really in it. I kind of covered it up. And the thing about grief is that it's alive and it'll wait for you. It's very patient. It's like you go and do your work, do what you need to do to try to busy yourself from feeling the feelings, and I'm going to be here. And so a lot of that grief really was not processed until my earlier 30s, when I started to tap into inner child healing work, things like that. But most recently, through my divorce, the death of a 17-year marriage was big. It was a lot. We're not grieving the death of the relationship necessarily, but also that all of the hopes and the dreams and the plans that we'd had for the future also, ironically, but also makes sense karmically, that it was for very similar reasons than the reason that my father was taken away. Although there was no suicide attempt involved, there was just mental health sensitive things involved in our situation. But the process of grief, it's like you can't eat, you can't sleep, you can't focus. That first week, especially, I felt physically disoriented. I was dizzy all the time. I just couldn't, what day is it? Where am I? Who am I? Is this really happening? What reality am I in? And this is what I hear from a lot of folks who, lose someone when someone passes, or the end of a relationship like this. So it's quite a wild ride. And when you really keep your heart open through it, you can love so much more after.
How do you mean keep your heart open through it? Is that equating to allowing yourself to feel everything?
Yeah.
And stop
Because
pushing it aside, like you said.
Yes. Because the instinct can be to, oh, this hurts too much. I need to contract and build up these walls, not let people in because it hurt too fucking bad the last time. That type of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like that when the conversation, because I've related the word grief, in many capacities, kind of what you just alluded to, in that it's not always biological death. I think we grieve many different things. You could lose many different things, even though if you lose something, they're not biologically gone. And it gets a lot of pushback for sometimes in regards to grief of a physical death, grief of a relationship. But to me, like I personally, I didn't have a 17-year marriage, but I was my ex-girlfriend when that ended, a year or two ago. That process afterwards, to me, it was a grieving process. And even though she's still alive, and we had that breakup, but the grieving process to me is it's like not the same thing, but it is the same thing. It's like you're grieving the loss of someone in your life that you're not going to see again, and you're grieving the future of what you could have had. But the weird part to me with grieving a relationship is that the person is still alive, and you lost
Yeah.
them. So it's like when you lose someone who died, you can't see them. You physically can't see them. Even though I've had plenty of episodes with mediums and psychics that say different, but
Yeah.
outside of that woo woo conversation, it's weirder because you know they're still alive, they're still roaming this earth, and you could see them, but you
Yeah.
can't at the same time, or you shouldn't. So that idea
Hmm.
of grieving something you have the ability to see is what kind of like I think twists the heart even differently.
It does. It really does. Because then when you see them again, like when I saw his face on FaceTime last night, it was like, oh, actually, that was the first time I didn't feel a charge behind it. Like I needed to, how are you? Are you
Mm.
okay? It was just be able to witness each other. But it is different because you do change. Like the process of grief does change you. And again, if you do stay open throughout it, it changes you for the better and doesn't make you more calloused and cold and disconnected. Like my capacity to love now is so much bigger than it was before this divorce.
Because of because of the way you're feeling it, and that just open what that do to like
Yeah.
recharge your emotions, or was it just learning lessons? Like how exactly are you more
Oh,
capable of loving after that?
yeah. I mean, learning lessons, sure, yes. But even deeper, it's like when you feel like your heart has been shattered and you're like, wow, this is one of the worst things that I could have imagined. It actually, I was like, if I could imagine him actually dying, I felt like that would have been easier because then I can reconcile like he's gone, gone. But to know like his mind is gone in this way, I don't know if he'll come back or when that would happen. And I have to let go of that possibility. And I meant to move on and also help my children to reconcile what the fuck just happened in layers.
Mhm.
There's that piece. Everyone's grieving, but yeah, keeping my heart open to the feeling, like a wave
Agui
of grief. A weef is gonna hit me out of nowhere.
It's like Mike
A wave
Tyson
of grief.
pronouncing grief. A grief.
A weef is gonna hit you like a motherfucking bitch. And, but it does. It like it'll just be fine. I started to feel lighter, and then all of a sudden, just this massive wave of grief, just like, I'm like, oh my god, I'm a fucking mess again. And so when you expand your capacity to feel the fullness of what you're feeling, that also translates into feeling the fullness of the joy and the pleasure and the bliss.
For exclusive access to bonus content, new episodes, and more, check out our Patreon account for only $5 a month. Link is in the description.
That makes sense because if it makes one side of the spectrum more potent, like that pain, then it's only going to make the other side of it, the opposite, which is joy, happiness, et cetera, more potent too. So that
Yeah.
makes sense. I could kind of understand. I think that makes sense. I feel like I feel things pretty heavy due to my own personal grief with even my dad, my friend, people I've lost, X, Y, Z. But allowing yourself to feel something, I say that's such a common thing for me to say because I feel like it's very overlooked and avoided, even though it sounds like a simple form, like allow yourself to feel. It's like I feel like shit, so yeah, I'm
Yeah.
allowing myself. I'm
But it's
clearly
fucking
feeling it,
hard.
but at the same time, like really, like not allow yourself to feel it and really go through it as opposed to just distracting yourself. But then there comes a
Yeah.
point in my head, like a lot of these conversations I have are, how you feel, this, that, and the other, which is important. But sometimes it is a conversation of just getting off your ass and you got to go
Yeah.
sometimes. There is a
Yeah.
balancing act of allowing yourself to feel it, but you can't, in my opinion, you can't go too deep sometimes. Sometimes you can
You don't
allow
want to
yourself to
spiral.
literally go through it. Like if you're in the room, like go through the
Yeah.
motions of letting it out, roll on the floor, scream, whatever, go through it. But sometimes at some point you really do got to kind of fight through that and get moving. Like, so
Yeah.
there is a balancing act of, I don't know, that like East Coast Italian vibe that I feel in my heart sometimes and, allow myself to feel, but all right, shut up and go. But it's
Yeah.
like
Shut the
it's
fuck up,
fine.
David. No,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sorry, before the episode,
get
that
up.
was that. I told her if there's anything you don't want me to ask, she's just gonna tell me to shut up. So don't take her the wrong way. I gave her that allowance.
He gave me consent.
But I gave yes consent. It's on video now, so I do have consent.
Yes.
It's but in regards to potentially having you tell me to shut up, what exactly? I'm curious with other details that you do share in regards to what you guys went through. Like, you don't have to go through the nitty gritty, but I'm curious because I feel like the effect of in a relationship, it does change the dynamic on was it mutual? Was it, clearly something happened, but what did
Yeah.
happen with his mental health? If you're comfortable talking about it, or tell me to shut up, that was the catalyst. Because I feel like the why is a
I'll give
big
you the middle
reason
ground.
of grief. Yeah, give me the middle
It
ground.
is. It is. And I think also what's important to emphasize for my own journey is that for the couple of years leading up to this, it was almost like I was being prepared in these micro containers of grief. Like I would see that there was something that, oh, what I thought it was is not. And I would grieve that. I remember one time I laid in bed and I wept like somebody fucking just died for 3 hours straight. I had never done that before. And I don't even know why. I didn't know why, but I knew better than to try to suppress it. So I had the space to do it, and I went and did it. And I was like, whoa, I don't know what that was about. It was like I was already grieving some deaths within the relationship. When this happened, it was like out of nowhere, but also looking back, it's like, oh yeah, this was just exactly what I was afraid of. I don't disclose the specific details because just to honor his privacy and his process, but there were some key points throughout that time that certain mental health things were just exacerbated and got to a precipice, a point where he just was very sure that he needed to go in one direction, that I just couldn't follow him. So I'm very much about, let's bring things to the table in a relationship and see how we can both honor ourselves and each other. And if at some point somebody has to compromise their integrity, then like that's not going to work. I value the integrity and the truth and the real love more than the longevity of that form of the relationship. And that when this one thing came up, I knew that it was that was it. It's like, fuck.
Well, so it's interesting. So your experience wasn't per se a falling out of love. It
No,
was, yeah. That's what's interesting about your experience and these experiences that fall into divorce or breaking up when it's not falling out of love. It's just it's other reasons, which I think happens all the time. I think plenty of people divorce or break up and they're still in love, but there's just outliers and external factors or internal factors that do just jumble everything up. And that's a totally different grief too. If you fall out of
it
love, it's just
is.
hard on one side if one person falls out of love, but an experience that is just changed the dynamic of the relationship. That is another type of grief in part. The
Yeah,
grief is the umbrella, but to still love someone and realize you can't be together is
yeah.
that's a painful one. That's a tough one to get over.
Yeah, to say I still choose you and like I want to choose you. Can you just give me something to work with here? Like please, like almost begging, like please, can we do this? Because I do not want to do this. But when you have to uh, go your separate ways and you really truly love each other, but the love just changes its form. It's no longer romantic. I had to release that. And what's crazy about me, the way that I'm built, is that when my heart is not fully invested in a relationship, I'm no longer sexually attracted to that person. So very pretty quickly, I could see him. He's my brother now. You know, he's my brother
Oh,
forever.
wow.
It's kind of bizarre, but like that's just my experience.
No, that makes sense. I mean, obviously, brother or sister love is like, it's just a different type of love, which is a deep love. Like, I love the shit out of my sisters, but
Yeah,
that sibling love, that sibling love is forever, regardless of what happens. Just a different dynamic. Because, I mean, because to me, it depends on the relationship with your siblings. But if my sisters or vice versa did something that was like wrong, you sound like I'm gonna break up with my sister now. Like you're no longer my
yeah.
sister, so it's not
Fuck
gonna
you,
work out.
sister.
Yeah,
Peace.
so sorry, it's like this isn't gonna work out. But yeah, no, it's an interesting shift, and again, that's one of the many layers of grief, and it is curious to me of the process of losing someone biologically and losing someone in a relationship because it is a similar process. They say the 5 stages of grief, and they compare it to, I guess it was originally done for terminal illness, and they've adapted it, but that process is very, very similar. And I just wonder if
Yeah,
someone is going through a breakup, through a divorce, or something like that. I think people get offended sometimes, which I've noticed when I brought this up. They're like, "Oh no, the death. It's not saying. What I was saying is the same thing, but the emotional reaction and the process to get over it,
yeah.
or not over. It's another word people are going to tap on me for, but to get through
To
it,
process it, yeah.
yeah, you have to process it. So for you, how did you do that? Obviously, you said feeling it, but was there anything in particular modalities that got you through a 17-year divorce?
Yeah, and you know what's interesting about this too is it's the same things I've been doing for years. The same things. Um, so I am very much into movement and
Mhm.
like bringing to my movement practice what I'm feeling. If it's intense, if it's sexy, if it's silly, like whatever. I'm that's been a practice of mine for years. I also have established a very strong connection spiritually and with my ancestors and with my spirit guides and things like that. So I felt very supported. I never for a moment in this whole process felt alone. And I also went deeper into my self pleasure practice. That's something I've had for many years. So I've always been like sourced from the source. Like he was never my source. And that certainly helps, because I know that for a lot of couples, when they go through breakups, they're like, oh, now I'm missing a part of me, because I only got this from him ever. And that's not to say that we don't need to, we do have needs in relationships, but that's another conversation. But really just tapping into the nourishment that I could in any way that I could. And I also started working with someone who was, different professionals, people who worked with me on looking deeper into my chart and understanding what's happening. And you know what's crazy, David? If I literally would have looked, if I would have known exactly where to look in his chart and mine, I could have seen this coming on the exact date down to the exact reason. So for people who say astrology isn't real, you haven't looked deep enough.
Yeah, so you on the astrology chart, you said in retrospect you could pinpoint your breakup and why it happened and when it happened based on this chart. Looking back at it, how? Oh, has it?
Yeah.
I don't understand that. I know I'm a
without
Pisces.
teaching
That's
the
all I
whole
got.
language of astrology, it's like a whole language. So you have the signs, you have your houses, you have your planets in different houses. And so in January, we had this big shift of a lifetime of Pluto moving from Capricorn into Aquarius. And he has strong placements in Aquarius at 0 degrees, which is the most extreme degree that you can have. That indicates you're going to wild extremes in that particular area of your life. And for him, it was his physical and mental health. And down to the day that things came up, Mars was in Capricorn, which is the planet of action and war. And that's when everything came to light. And the reason being something around an obsession over something that he just could not let go of. So it's really crazy. That's kind of it in a nutshell.
I mean, it's an interesting nutshell, because I don't really know that world very well. I like hearing it, and I'm just curious. I'm not very educated on it. Like I said, I just know I'm a Pisces. That's all I got. and then people tell me certain things, and it's funny because I'm open to it. I don't know enough to like make a decision on either. I was like, maybe with energy in regards to the constellations, like that makes sense to me in some ways from an ignorant point of view of not knowing things. But then sometimes I make stupid jokes, but I feel like when some people around me
use it as an excuse,
point to a side, I'm like, maybe you're just a bitch. Maybe this has nothing to do. Like,
maybe
dude,
it's not because you're a Scorpio. No?
Maybe it's not because David, not because you're a Pisces. You're just a dick. I'm like, okay, that's probably fair. But
no, there's always an unhealthy version of all of it, and an integrated version. You use it as a map instead of as a justification to be a dick.
I like as a map. I like that. So let me ask you one thing about your how many kids do you have?
I have 4 kids.
4 kids. So what is the dynamic of grieving a relationship and losing a husband as a husband, again, not from someone you physically lost, and having your 4 kids? What was that dynamic for you? Because I feel like that is a difficult process of navigating why you guys aren't together, explaining to your children, and then of course raising children while you're in this grief process.
Well, I mean, firstly, I think it's important to bring into the conversation how, earlier you said sometimes you can spiral, but then you got to get up and get back on your ass, like get your ass out of bed and get on with life. Like they are the thing that kept me getting up, they and my work, because it's like, yes, I'm going to feel the feelings. And then 20 minutes later, I might be having a conversation with a client that I'm like, I'm on. And there's no forcing involved. It's just like when I really honored the emotional process, I could actually show up for them and for my people. And so, it's a different layer of complexity to be there with them. And I really understood from the beginning that the best thing I could do for them was receive nourishment for myself. Because if I'm doing better, if I'm not hurting anymore, but if I'm actually going through my process and honoring that, then that's going to help them the most.
What do you mean? You said nourishment a couple of times. I feel like nourishment, I guess you could fill that variable in for whatever nourishment is to you personally, like the general you. What do you mean by nourishment? Like, is this part of your practices that you've explained, whether it's the movement, whether it's feeling, or is nourishment something specific?
Yeah. I mean, just spiritually speaking, physically speaking, all of it. So physically, what if I don't have an appetite? Can I at least make myself a green drink or like eat an apple or something? Like fuel my body. And I'm not just eating junk food once I get my appetite back. There's the physical nourishment. For me, there's the mental nourishment too. Like, what am I putting into my mind? Am I focusing on like, men are pigs, men are bullshit, I can't trust men, Or am I really like, okay, this was my experience and it fucking sucks and it hurts. and I'm honest about it, and then having conversations with people that really get me and see me, and not people that are going to put more bullshit in my mind, you know? And then there's the spiritual nourishment of connecting to that source love every single day and coming back to it, just like I had been. So those are the main things that I would say.
That makes sense. And in regards to the dialogue with your children, is that something you gotta not sugarcoat, but is it something
Yeah,
that you have to be honest? Like how honest are you with your kids with the process? 'Cause I'm sure there's, and I don't want to say how honest you're like in a negative connotation of I have to lie to my kids, but some things, there's things you can
yeah. It's age
jellyfish
appropriate.
around. Yeah, yeah. You don't, some things like you might not tell your kid. Like my mom would not tell me things until I found out later and for
Yeah,
to protect me, and I understand that. So it's like,
exactly.
what level of honesty do you have a dialogue with your children in regards to the divorce process?
I mean, a lot of it they witnessed firsthand. So
Okay.
they would witness, outbursts or things like the spirals and the episodes. And so I wasn't going to try to justify that, but but instead bring more understanding into here's what's happening. Here's what's happening in his mind or in his brain right now or in his spirit. And he's going through his thing and it's not about you. It's not your fault. He's not leaving because of you. Like I feel like these are things that kids need to hear sometimes because I for one didn't know that I even internalized that until this grieving process, that I blamed myself for being too difficult as a child, and that drove my father away. Makes no fucking sense. There's no logical evidence to support that, but that's what my little self, believed. So bringing that to them and yeah, it's not like sugarcoating versus not sugarcoating. It's just really what are they seeing and how can I bring more love into that for them.
Yeah, that's it. I'm glad you brought up your father again because that was something we haven't really tapped into. And is there anything regarding that process that you feel like you're still working out? Like I know you just tapped into thinking it was your fault, but is that because it's been how many years since it's been 25 years or
Like
something like
20,
that
25, yeah,
since you have seen your father?
since I've seen him, yeah.
And he again, he's still alive. He's still alive today, or you don't
Yeah.
know?
And he's in an institution, but he's still alive, yeah.
Got it. Okay, so both of these experiences have had to do with mental health and essentially losing someone due to mental health, even though they're still alive. Which is interesting. It's been 25 years apart, and they're both male figures. It's just a wild
Yeah.
coincidence that
Hmm.
It's like almost reincarnating a similar experience. Now you're going through it as an adult.
Yeah.
What is that process for you and and not seeing your father in 25 years, knowing he's still he's still on Earth, he's still alive. So that's grief of a father that isn't here but is here.
I think what helped me to reconcile that some years ago, because I started to go deeper into the fatherhood wounding and the inner child stuff around that, um, almost 8 years ago. And initially there was a lot. It was like, whoa, I didn't even know that this still hurt me. I didn't know that I had any feelings about it at all because everything was so covered up.
Mm.
And also because, my joy was muted too. My capacity for pleasure was very diminished. Everything was like, "Oh, we're going to be even keel like this. We just don't want to feel too much of anything." But when I started to unlock that, and then also the wounding around my mother and the ways that I blamed her, the ways that I saw her as a martyr, all that stuff, the parent stuff is really fucking deep. Um,
Mhm.
so there came a point where I really, it helped me to reconcile my inner child pain, to recognize that really my father had been gone. Like he's gone. Who he was when I was a kid is gone. His body is alive. He is in a different place in his consciousness or whatever mindset, but he is gone. And that was oddly helpful because then it's not like my daddy who took me on motorcycle rides and bought me some weird exotic animals is out there somewhere. Like that whole version of him is dead. And when you think about it, really, versions of us are always dying. We're always kind of, in an essence, grieving the past of ourselves in these micro experiences. But yeah, I worked through a lot of that. What was interesting is that came up, that blaming myself for being a reason that he had to go or that he went crazy. Um, that came up during a session with my spiritual medium, and I was
How so?
connecting with my guides. It just came. Like, when you just like something drops and you're like, boop, and you're like, oh shit,
Yeah.
moment of clarity. It was one of
Mhm.
those moments. She does past life readings and karmic clearings as well. So who were doing all that stuff.
Wait, so it came up with your medium in regards to because the medium's usually, I guess it depends, but the process when it comes to a medium, it's not always just about deceased loved ones and crossing over to
Right.
the other side. It's this. It could actually
It's the
heal
whole
the
spirit
situation
realm.
that you're doing. The whole spirit realm. So I want to tap into that, but another question you mentioned about inner child work. What actually is that work? I understand the idea of, I think a lot of people, we're all dealing with a lot of things that happen as kids, and we're still holding on to a lot of that stuff. So I feel like that's where a lot of
Yeah.
it comes from. But what is that logistically? Like, what does inner child work mean? Like, how do you actually bring that up, and how do you work through that if you're someone else listening?
Yeah. So there are different ways, different approaches to this. I know that in traditional therapy, you might call it, internal family systems. But from a more, I guess, esoteric or spiritual, metaphysical aspect, the way that I approached it and was guided into it was, and you get into a meditative space and you're in this, you're feeling in your body, you're feeling your heart, you're not thinking about a million things you have to do today. And you call your inner child into the space in your mind's eye, and you begin to connect with them. And what's interesting is that when people start to do this work, when I guide them through it, sometimes their inner child just does not fucking trust them. They're like, I don't want to be here. I'm not happy with you. You abandoned me, to their adult selves. Like, you didn't
Mm.
stand up for me. You haven't protected me. So in this space, you can kind of just observe your inner child, notice what age they come to you as, because it's not just a one and done thing. I've worked with my inner child at different stages and my inner teen at different stages. And let me tell you, the inner teenager is another level of something. Um,
Yeah, I can imagine. I was a little bit of a dick as a young teenager.
yeah. But then you just listen to them and you say like, I'm here. I'm here and I
Mm.
am never leaving you. I am never leaving you again. And I'm going to take
It's
care of
inter-
you and I'm going to protect you.
I had like the opposite conversation. I figured if I brought this up on another podcast I have, I'm going to be a little redundant, but I had I was in the isolation tank, what sensory deprivation tank. For anyone that doesn't know what that is, you go in
Yeah.
this big black tank naked and Epsom salt that makes you float, and you're floating in this tank in darkness, deprivating yourself of your senses. So it's like you're just floating with darkness. So it's a terrible explanation. But anyway, I was there, and I had this moment where I was kind of like, felt like I was deep in meditation, and I was thinking about a lot of things, because you're literally only there with your thoughts. And I started having like a conversation with my future self. So it was like the opposite of
Yes,
this
those are
like
good
inner. It was
too.
like, that was weird. What do you even call that? I don't know. Like it was
I'm a
just me
future self. Just connecting with your future self.
just connection. That's it. Connection with my future self, future
Yeah.
David. And I was talking to future David in my head, kind of telling him to chill out and not worry, because I was in the moment. Like today, David was worried about XYZ. And then I was thinking about past David, even just like not a child, but even just like a year or two ago, and just trying to show myself the movement I've made in life, and to not, if you look back at where you were, XYZ, I'm in a better place, blah, blah, blah. But then looking at my future self, I was telling him to chill out and not worry, because look at David today. Like, does this make sense? I was talking to
Yeah.
future self to think about today, David, because look where he is now, and stop worrying then about something that like you've already improved upon. So it was wild before that, I never really understood having those dialogues with your child self, because I feel like, am I making this conversation up? Am I really talking to my younger self? You know what I mean? But
Mhm.
nevertheless, regardless of what's real or not real in my head, having that dialogue and working it out, even if it is imaginary or even if it's real, I don't know. Maybe you do. But that conversation, having that dialogue, is like a release of energy and working things out, where I can
Yes.
totally see the release regardless. It becomes like, regardless of belief, it's just, did it feel good? Do you feel better? And if you
Yes.
did, okay, that's enough.
And it doesn't have to, because the thing is that all of these versions of you already still exist in you. So you're just accessing these parts of you that you haven't really connected with. So it's like, hey, 5-year-old
Mm.
self, like, let's have a conversation. What do you need? And I've had some wild experiences with folks, guiding them through these exercises, where they're like, oh, I had forgotten for the past 30, 40 years that I even had that experience as a kid. And my inner child really wanted me to see that. And that healed some things and reconciled things and all these timelines. So, and then also it's interesting too, talking about your future self. You can bring in your future self and a past version of yourself, and just all like sit down and have a chat. Like, this is parts integration work. You're bringing in different parts of yourself and kind of just integrating them, taking them back into the fullness of who you are. So it sounds kind of out there and woo-woo, but when you experience it,
no, I love that. They actually gave me a sketch idea. I think I'm gonna actually I was thinking like a video creating, and I'm gonna be talking to the three different versions of me in one room: my future self, my past self, and my today self, all at a round table having a conversation.
Yes.
I don't know if anyone's gonna want to tune into that, but
I think it's gonna be a hit.
So how? Yeah, I mean, if I do it right, I'm gonna work on that after we get off this podcast. But listen, I just want to thank you for hopping on here. I do want to clarify one thing. I'm like, how are you today? How long has it been? Obviously, we know it's been 25 years since you saw your father. How long has it been since the relationship ended, and how are you feeling today?
The relationship with my father, or
what? I know that's the marriage. Sorry for not clarifying.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's been a few months now. I just in the past, but the first month was the heaviest. Once he was out of the house, there was a lot more releasing. And I will say this too, for anyone going through separations, especially divorce, when you really want to sever the energetic ties, cleaning up house. And what's crazy is every time when I would clean out his things from the closet, or put away his sweaters, or put away his shoes, or put his coat, and I just have a stash of his stuff that's like in its area. It's no longer all over the house. But every time I would do that in a significant way, he would call kind of frantic, like, what's happening? Like, he could feel me letting go. And so I feel like that is such an important piece of really when you want to bring back your own energy to yourself. And I felt conflicted that I felt so much lighter the first month that he was gone. I was like, oh, I am happy to feel lighter and feel radiant again. But also, that's hard to acknowledge,
It's that acknowledgement sometimes. Sometimes just that acknowledgement and that honest acknowledgement goes a long way with whatever you're going through. It's weird.
Yeah.
It's like so easy. It's just so easy to lie to yourself, I feel like, right? Like it's so easy to, even just the way you're feeling.
Self-protection.
Of course, exactly. It's literally self-protection. We think we're protecting ourselves in the temporary moment, but in the long term, no, we're just it's a temporary protection. It's not it's not a long term, but it's odd to think you're protecting yourself, but you need to be aware that you're protecting yourself, but not healing yourself. So I think it's almost like two different things sometimes.
Yeah. That's why it can take years for a breakup to really mend, because people aren't actually healing. They're just distracting and not feeling things.
Yeah, no, I'm surprised it took me. I was my friends called me out for a while. I was like, damn, you're like not, something's off. Something's off. And I recognized that, but I feel like I thought I was going through it. I think I was. I think it just took me a little longer. But I also knew I was doing things that were prolonging it. Like looking back, I knew I was aware I was putting myself through this stuff of just still keeping a connection when that connection shouldn't have been there. And so it just prolonged the process as opposed to just ripping the Band-Aid off and that, the other, but it's easier said than done. I mean, in my head, everything's easier said than done. I don't know,
so true. Feeling your feelings is easier said than done.
Yeah, literally everything is easier said than. I can't think of one thing that's easier done than said. I've said this a million times. It drives me nuts thinking about it. But Luci, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. And this is a cool conversation because I've been wanting to talk to someone specifically that has living grief, if you will, a grief that the people are still around us, but you're still grieving them not being in your life, and it's not a comparison thing, but grief is grief in many ways, in many capacities. So the process is going to be similar, even if it's a biological death or not. So if there's anything you want to drop in regards to, I'll put all your information that the episode as usual, my little dead talkers. So if there's anything you want to say before we get out of here, the mic's yours.
No, just if anyone wants to go further into the work that I do, you can go to my website that you have the link and see the current offerings and courses and all of that stuff.
There we go. So check out the links in the bio if you want to find out more about her and her work. Other than that, I want to thank you all for listening to another episode of Dead Talks. And until next time.
Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Dead Talks. Please do not forget to hit the subscribe button and also the notification bell. That'll give you updates as to when we post a new video, more episodes, and more content in general. We are streaming on all the major podcast platforms, including Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, and all that. And also find us on Instagram at Dead Talks Podcast or www.deadtalks.net. Thank you so much.